My recommendation is to look at those opportunities in the affirmative as a time for yourself to become better at making a difference in the lives of others.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Higher Purpose of Andrew Blumen Podcast. I am your host, Brett Connolly. And she's back,
Hi.
Sarah Gonzalez
Sarah G,
in the
up?
house. We have a good episode ahead.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to this. I like how we do different rhythms
Yes.
with the keeping the main thing, and that's being a good steward of this one life that we have. And so we have Mike Useem, who wrote this awesome book called Leading Up, and you hear him talk about that quite a bit. And it's how to lead your boss so you both win. And he is a professor that focuses on leadership and management and is just so well educated, so well spoken for, has done a ton of research.
Yes.
And so should we get started?
I think we should just jump right in.
Let's go. Awesome. And Mike, thank you again for hopping on with us today. And I know Sarah and I have had a really good time just diving into the book, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked off air of just a desire to be a space where we're interacting with people that are early on in their careers, or they're just getting started before their careers even launch. And a book like this that you wrote, was it 2001, of Leading Up, How to Lead Your Boss So You Both Win. I think all of our listeners are going to find themselves in a seat like this.
Yeah.
And so being in a spot where eight stories? Well, 10 stories, but 8 chapters, right? Of nonfiction. And I'll tell you, I'm a sucker for nonfiction. Sarah knows I'm a sucker for nonfiction.
Big bookworm.
I just finished a book about Samurai William and how England came to Japan and opened up trade and all. So like
classic Brett.
Yeah, I know. So we got this book. We were Googling like, man, who can we have on? Just different wrinkles of listeners finding success in their space. And we as soon as we saw what the book was about, we knew we had to have you on. So thanks for joining us today, and look forward to diving into some things.
All right. Well, Brett, thank you. And Sarah, thank you. Appreciate a chance to dialogue with you and to be on your program.
Yeah.
So let's all lead up.
Let's do it. I love it. I love
it.
it. Well, I would love to know just kind of the background, like what led you to write this book?
Yeah.
Well, a fairly lengthy process boiled down to the essentials. I've long taught a course on management, separately a course on leadership here at the Wharton School, the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania. And in looking at people who have sought to manage, have sought to lead, in some instances, I came to appreciate that they were not leading their subordinates or the people on their team. They were actually leading their boss.
Mm-hmm.
And just to draw a distinction here between leading up and managing up, to clarify what leading up, in my view, should really entail. Managing up, very important. How to stay in favor with your boss, how to help your boss appreciate how good you are. We all need to do that. We want to do that. I even teach the topic in one of my courses. And there's a very famous article, you'll find it out there, by John Gabaro and John Cotter, called Managing Your Boss. And it really references in some detail, quite graphic, quite illustrative, how to stay in favor with your boss. Having said that, leading up is very different from managing up. And leading up, in my view, should entail thinking about what your unit, your maybe a floor of a factory, maybe a section of a hospital, or wherever you may be employed. We do need to manage up, but on some days we also need to lead up when people above us, maybe a rank or two above us, are, in our own estimate, heading off in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And you're going to do them a huge favor. You got to do it carefully, otherwise you have your head handed to you on a platter. But if you do it very carefully, and that's the art of leading up, you will be uh, taking on a calling to make whatever you're helping to manage or helping to make happen, to make happen better and get people to a more promised land. So leading up right there parallel with managing up. And Brett and Sarah, just to add one more way to think about this as we plunge in, if you go to the dictionary and you look up leading or leadership or whatever word you choose to take a look at, the dictionary typically says it's helping people below you in some kind of a reporting relationship to you to go in the direction that you seek to take everybody in. In my view, that dictionary definition of leader or leadership is way too limited in that from experience, from watching people like you and others that I've studied, it's kind of my habit is to observe, witness, interview a lot of people. I've come to conclude that many people, a little bit like a 360 evaluation where everybody around you evaluates you, leadership, in my view, should be a reverse 360. We should manage first of all, we should lead first of all people that we have reporting to us. But don't forget your partners, those that are kind of lateral on the same plane. Often they want to go where you want to go, and you can do them a huge favor if you exhibit some leadership. And then the same in the upward direction. You really want to be good. You want to become good at working with people above you, not to curry favor with them, but to help them think more strategically, become more decisive and more persuasive in what they're doing. Call that leading up. Or a different way to sum up the point, we need a leadership compass in all 90-degree quadrants. So we need to lead ourselves, we need to lead down, we need to lead out, and we need to lead up.
That's good.
I love that. Now, before we continue to dive in, I think one of my favorite parts about this podcast is getting to ask all of our guests, how did you get to where you are? So before we dive into all of the different things about your book, I kind of want to know, when you were first getting started in your career, what did you want to do? And then what have you gotten to do? What are the different things that you just kind of been led in? Because I think for our listeners who maybe have their hearts really set on one career are now in it thinking, I don't know if I love this as much.
That's
so
right.
Tell us a little bit about what your career journey has looked like, what led to writing something like this, but really just want to hear more about you.
Yeah, Sarah, it's a really good question because for academic instructors like me, we read books, we get trained, I did a doctoral degree along the way.
Yeah.
But when it comes to teaching, it's an art form. It's an art form in the sense that you have to communicate well, you have to keep people engaged, and above all, you want people to walk out of the darn room at the end of the session, remembering at least 4 or 5 main points.
Yeah.
And in the course of learning how to do that, that took me a long time, and I'm still learning, of course, like everybody else. I came to appreciate that as I looked at leaders in challenging circumstances, part of their success, sometimes their failure, was not in leading people that reported into them, but it was leading people above them. They had a better idea than the boss, and they just failed to communicate it in some cases, or did communicate it in some cases. A case in point to make it more tangible, this is a well-known moment, a disastrous moment for the great Korean firm Samsung. And we know Samsung now from its phones. Samsung makes just about everything. And at one point, and I bet neither of you knew this, Samsung began to produce automobiles.
I didn't know that until I read the book.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, it's in there, right?
It is.
Right, you could buy a Samsung, believe it or not. Anyway, it turned out to be disastrous. The company was not competitive in that field. It discovered after spending several $1 billion. And the top person said to all of his direct reports, did anybody think this was going to go bad? A couple years ago when we launched, and a number of hands went up and said, well, boss, as a matter of fact, we did
Oh, man.
think this was not going to be a good idea. And so the big boss said, well, why didn't you tell me? And in trying to kind of tease out why they didn't tell him, I guess I did just come up with this phrase, leading up. He wanted them to lead up.
Hmm.
He wanted them to tell him he was about to make a big mistake, but there was maybe something in his demeanor, or he didn't ask a whole lot of questions, or he was the big boss, didn't expect anybody to challenge his thinking. With all that said, his opportunity to have people lead up with him was bypassed, and he made a couple $1 billion mistake.
Mm.
So, to be honest, in just looking at case after case, circumstance after circumstance, I came to realize that there is a huge opportunity for people to make a better world that entails not just leading down. We all want to lead in some way, but to lead out and to lead up.
Hmm. That's really good. And in a couple of decades since the book originally came out, so many stories have come out. You know,
Yeah.
technology's expanded. There's so many different elements, and for people that may be interested in reading the book, I think there's just a lot of depth and wisdom within the chapters. But I'm just curious, Mike, from your perspective, in 2 decades plus since the book came out, if there was like a 2.0 for your book, has there been a story over the last couple of decades that you go, man, that fits really well into leading up?
Yeah, Brett, I appreciate the question in that for me, the A case, if you will, just a compelling moment, in this case in the country of Chile, really said it all, certainly to me. My guess is you and your viewers and listeners do recall now about 14 years ago, 33 miners were trapped deep under the surface of a northern Chilean mine in what's called the Atacama, it's northern Chile. 33 miners were trapped about 2,000 feet below the surface, and there was no way to get to them. In that, after a cave-in, the hallways, the tunnelways down to where they were, completely filled with debris. And on top of that, the rest of the mine threatened to cave in, thus possibly killing not only the 33 who were trapped, but any kind of rescue crew going in after them. So the initial rescue crew that tried to rescue the 33, that tried to find and then pull up the 33, very discouraged by the circumstance, but they met a person who had become a minister of mines for Chile. His name is Lawrence Goldborn. He was a company manager. He ran kind of a Target-like company in the Republic of Chile. And under a new president, some years back in 2010, in fact, a new president came in and appointed Lawrence Goldborn Minister of Mines. The mine where the cave-in occurred was private. Lawrence Goldborn is a public regulator, Minister of Mines. He makes certain the mines are safe. This one obviously not so. And he, through a number of steps that I won't go into right now, decided to take charge of the rescue of the miners, if they were alive. And over the next several months, the cave-in happened in early August in 2010. Over the next several months, he put together, call it a leadership pyramid. He was in the middle. So he was on the surface. He brought in physicians, he brought in mining engineers, but he couldn't have done any of the above if he had not led his boss, if he had not led up, if he had not convinced the president of the country, a person named Sebastian Piñera, president of the Republic of Chile, to provide a big budget to get equipment in, to lend resources. So to pursue the rescue, he had to lead up with his boss, and he did very successfully by talking with the president almost every day.
Wow.
One of the features of leading up is being in close contact with those above you. At the same time, he was madly drilling down to where they brought in drilling equipment, madly drilling down to where the miners were trapped. Not even knowing if they were there, if they were crushed by the cave-in, or if they had adequate water. Everybody thought on the surface they had almost no food because people knew what was in the mine at the time of the cave-in. In any case, he, Lawrence Goldborn, and his engineers drilled a 6-inch borehole down to the miners, to where he thought the miners were located. turns out he hit pay dirt. This 2,000-foot long, basically a smokestack, a tube going down to the engineers, revealed down to the miners, revealed that the miners were alive and in relatively good condition. They lacked food, they were starving, they lacked just about everything else. And so over the next weeks, Lawrence Goldborn sent food down, letters from families, even arranged for a video cam to go down so the trapped miners still trapped could talk with family. That said, all the work on the surface, a huge crew is madly drilling now bigger holes to allow a shaft to go down, then to bring the miners up, which ultimately is going to happen. I think everybody appreciates that. For that rescue to be successful, he now had led up, bringing in resources from the country, and by the way, from the U.S. and Australia and elsewhere. But now he really had to, in effect, lead down and hope that the people in this trapped kind of almost a little cave, a little enclave, that they were surviving mentally, physically. Some had been infected and so on. Among the 33 miners that were trapped 2,000 feet below, several of the miners, thank goodness, some now with Lawrence Goldborn's urging, began to take charge and work to make certain that the miners were as in good mental and physical shape as could be possible, such that when the full 26-inch diameter shaft was reached all the way down to them, there were people to actually rescue.
Wow.
In a nutshell, Lawrence Goldborn achieved one of the miracle rescues of the ages. It's estimated more people saw the rescue than watch a typical Tour de France or the final game in the World Cup.
Wow.
Over 1 billion people watched at least one of the miners come to the surface. Probably you, probably some of your viewers and listeners, myself included. October 12 and 13. One by one, the 33, all 33,
Wow.
Incredible.
in pretty good shape, came to the surface. And to go back then on the main point, how is it that they were kind of given up for lost, unreachable? A couple of months later, they were on the surface cheering. The family and friends were there weeping.
Yeah.
Well, it took a lot of leadership on the part of Lawrence Goldborn to lead himself and his team, the more conventional definition of leadership. But he also led those below, also part of the more conventional summary for leadership. So his team and those below his team. But he also could not have done what he did if he had not led the president of the country. Sebastian Pinera kept saying, and I interviewed him at length on this, along with the Minister of Mines, he kept saying, Goldborn, what do you want? What do you need? Tell me what you want me to do. What kind of support do you need?
Wow.
And Lawrence Goldborn was the very article of great upward leadership. He appreciated the constraints the president had, didn't want to overplay his hand, didn't want to be too optimistic when he shouldn't be.
Right.
And with that, Lawrence Goldborn kept the upward leadership going. In ultimately October 12 and 13, 2010, the miners reached the surface. Would not have happened without a lot of upward leadership.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Before you get to your question, couple of quick hits. My wife is Chilean, so this is the first official A Higher Purpose
That we've
podcast
mentioned.
Chile shout out. So that was
Okay.
good. And second, were you old enough to know that? She's the baby of the podcast.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not old enough to have like fully remembered that. I've heard about that as an adult now, but in 2010 I was I think I was in like second grade.
Stop it.
Okay.
Stop it. Okay, that hurts.
Well, like a lot of our viewers and listeners, but let me just, for people interested, there have been 4 or 5 films that have come out, including a really superb film from Hollywood. So there and a bunch of books, and usually the movies and the books, somewhere in the title have the number 33. The 33.
Yeah.
So even if you didn't witness it, if you weren't on our good earth at that point, I actually think it's one of the great examples in our universe of the marvels and the benefits of upward leadership when it really makes a difference.
Yes. I love that. Well, kind of touching on that, just that whole story had a lot to do with communication, which you talk a lot about in your book, how to effectively communicate with your bosses, keeping them in the loop. So tell us a little bit about how our listeners, young professionals, can effectively communicate with their boss, especially when they are trying to lead up. And what does that look like?
Sure. So, Sarah, there's no rocket science here. It's just kind of almost intuition will, I think, serve you very well.
Yeah.
Uh, to put that a little bit differently, if you're not an extrovert, if you're a little bit shy, especially in talking with superiors, let me just say that nobody is born a leader.
Hmm.
It's not in our chromosomes, it's not in our genetics. So people who are really good at that somehow learned it along the way,
Yeah.
which is a way of saying that everything we consider to be leadership like, thinking strategically, acting decisively,
Right.
can be strengthened and learned if we just look at the world we're in, read about it, watch great films on it, participate in whatever you can to master the art of leadership more generically, more generally. With that said, as a platform, the art of communicating upward is, again, it's no rocket science. And I think it sums up to three main points. Uh, Talk with your boss, even if your boss is a little bit shy, doesn't seem to ask a lot of questions. Um, Come in, think what your boss would like to know about what you're doing, where things are going right, maybe where things are not going so well. So, talking frequently to your boss. My favorite example of that actually comes from the U.S. Civil War
Hmm.
when the general of the Confederacy, Robert E. Lee, with his president, a person named Jefferson Davis, during the Civil War years, Robert E. Lee, uh, in pursuit of his goals, recognized that Jefferson Davis held the basically what was the paymaster. He was the person who would allow Robert E. Lee to acquire more troops, take risky actions, and to secure Jefferson Davis's stronger leadership in a way that Lee thought it should be exercised. He had the habit of writing to his boss, Jefferson Davis, often, sometimes with good, sometimes with not good news. So, anyway, getting over a natural shyness, I happen to share it, and communicating upwards is number one. Number two, it's always better to do so if you can do it with some others at the same time.
Hmm.
So, number two, talking with your colleagues, not in a mean spirited way of trying to bring out dirt on your boss, but talking with others about what seems to animate the boss, or even more specifically, does the boss want to hear in a memo, a text message, a phone call, a face to face meeting?
Yeah.
And in talking with your colleagues more or less at your same level, it's a way to become better at knowing ahead of time how you're going to be able to commute with your boss. Number three, maybe most importantly of the three, is in communicating with your immediate direct boss, or maybe even a couple layers up, appreciating who they are, what constraints they're facing, what they're fearful about, understanding their world, not simply from your standpoint, but from their standpoint, is the platform for effectively taking your cause upstairs.
Mm.
So, and maybe just a final summary point in my own way of collecting information on people like you who do that is by talking with, sometimes even watching people do it. And I have to say, those that are really good at that weren't necessarily very good at all when they first began.
Hmm.
Making the point yet again, most of what we're talking about is acquired, not natural to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of the book you're talking about, obviously leading up, talking about our listeners being earlier in their career or trying to figure out what their career is even going to be, but articles coming out about Gen Z struggling in the workforce, not going through the proper channels. Maybe you have ideas,
Yeah.
maybe you have concerns, maybe you would like to provide feedback. Maybe they're intimidated to do that and just don't do it, or they do it in a poor kind of avenue or stream.
Yeah.
as someone starting off as a professional, do you have any advice for those people that are like, I have ideas or I'd like to give feedback? Maybe I'm too shy or maybe I'm a little too bullish. What's your kind of
Yeah.
recommendation for them?
Well, let me offer two quick thoughts on that. Number one, a quick yes to your Brett, to your final thoughts there. Just getting out there and doing it.
Hmm.
Just trying it out. You may get rebuffed. Some people don't want to hear what you have to say, but you're never going to know unless you give it a try.
That's right.
Yeah.
So experiment at the edges. Don't get too brash and bold here. But if you got a thought, look, we could do much better in rendering patient care if we do this on our hospital floor here.
Hmm.
Your boss might say, well, we already did that. And you might then, if you've done your research, say, well, you did it, but we didn't have some equipment we have now.
Hmm.
So why don't we just talk about it? So it's a learned skill on how to communicate that upwardly. The other side of it is then to look at leading up from the symmetry that it implies. So we need to lead up by looking up at people above us. We also need to look not down on, but we need to look in the direction of people who are trying to lead up with us, and we need to encourage them, to coax them. Come on in, let's talk. What's going on? Tell me what's happened. And I think the best in class of people who are able to generate a spirit of leading up, better ideas flow up, are those that can make people below them relaxed and ready to disclose some significant shortcomings that need addressing that any good boss would want to address.
Hmm.
So I think the quick summary is we got to learn how to do it well by experiencing it and giving ourselves feedback on it. But also we need to encourage other people around us to give us upward, good, constructive feedback.
Yeah. I love that. That's super helpful for our listeners, I think, to hear that. And I, going off of that, want to hear about a time that either you or someone close to you led up professionally and what that experience was like.
Well, here's an example that really kind of gets at the nub of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
Sarah, and that is I followed at distance a banker in New York who presided over a huge investment bank, and a kind of mid to lower level employee committed an act of malfeasance,
Hmm.
did something that the employee should not have done, turned out to be an illegal act. And the a manager in between the top person and the person that committed the malfeasant act took that bad news up to the big boss, the chief executive, in fact, of a investment bank, and said, here's what happened, and I recommend to you, the chief executive officer here, that you call the Federal Reserve today and report what we did. We looks like we broke the law in the way we handled some of what's called the Treasury auction, when the U.S. was seeking to borrow money from the public borrowing market. In any case, the chief executive said, on hearing about this problem, okay, I'm going to report it. But in reporting it, I'm going to actually talk to the chair of the Federal Reserve at a cocktail party later today or maybe tomorrow.
Hmm.
And the mid-level manager is thinking maybe not a good idea. A cocktail party is maybe not your best medium. Lots of stuff gets said. Nobody remembers the next day. And it may not be appropriate, given the gravity of the offense,
Hmm.
for this to be just a quick oral sentence or two. But having described that, over the next week, over the next month, the chief executive and the head of the U.S. Federal Reserve never found each other at the same cocktail party. It just didn't happen.
Hmm.
In the meantime, the mid-level manager is thinking, boy, this is not good. My boss, the chief executive, knows about an improper, and as it will turn out to be, an illegal act on the part of one of our frontline employees here, and nothing is being done. And with the benefit of hindsight, that middle manager said, when my boss says I'm going to report, the big boss said, I'm going to report this to the head of the chair of the New York of the the Federal Reserve, uh, through a cocktail conversation, I should have shown some courage and said, "Sir, in my humble opinion, I don't think that's a good idea because it strategically is not a way to communicate, given the gravity and the circumstance, what has happened." The middle manager, would have done the boss a huge favor because when this finally came out a couple of months later, it became a career ender for the big boss. He was never allowed to be in banking again,
Oh, wow.
in part because he had delayed in reporting.
Mm.
And that middle manager, had he led up, maybe the boss didn't want to hear it. Maybe that's, or he definitely wanted to report in his own way. Had the middle manager said that's unstrategic, given the scope and scale of what we're talking about, I strongly recommended you call up the Fed today by phone or go down to Washington. It would have saved a whole lot of grief for a whole lot of people, and it would have ultimately sustained the career of the top person.
Yeah.
So there are moments, they're not frequent, but there are unequivocally moments when people who are closer to the scene of action understand before people at the top hear about what's going wrong, such that if those below can lead up effectively, you can save the day. To be a little bit acute about this, I've talked with a chief executive of a large firm many, many times about how he leads, and he's always quick to explain that as he rose from entry level to the top level, many of the people who are listening, hopefully, to our program today or watching it, are in the circumstance that this person was when he first began. He was at the lowest possible rung. He was new. First civilian job, he had been in the Army for a couple of years. Anyway, to get to the main point, he said the higher he got in the firm, the better became the information that he heard, which is a way of saying bad information does not travel up very well. People don't want to reveal it. And he said a huge task on his part is to help that information come up so we can do something about it. Or in other words, to use the phrase of our conversation today, he's worked hard over his career to help people better lead up.
That's good. Over the last 20 plus years, when you're watching the news or following a story, how many times have you said, should have read my book?
Well, I think I'm going to just let people decide to read the book on their own. But I'll take your question in one particular direction.
Yeah.
In my view, everybody in larger or lesser measure, in capitals or maybe in lowercase, lead in their own place, in their own way.
Yeah.
Some of the bigger companies, take Walmart, 2.5 million employees. The CEO of Walmart leads 2.5 million employees. Many people, though, work for themselves or maybe two or three other people or with two or three other people in the firm. In my view or my experience, it doesn't matter where you are, leadership, making a difference, taking charge if you're not fully in charge, thinking strategically, acting in a timely way, all part of that bigger formula of leading. I actually happen to think it's vital everywhere. And the peculiar element of this particular book that I stressed is what is often forgotten, which is we need to lead out, we need to lead down for sure.
Yeah.
We also need to lead up. So that's a way I think of saying, just by way of a concluding point, let's get on with it. Let's lead in all directions, including up.
Yeah, that'll preach. And we were kind of laughing, but I'm glad you like hooked it into a real bona fide beneficial answer. And, you know, I'm thinking of someone young going, man, I'm just now being introduced to this book. I love the idea of leading up, but where the heck do I start? You know, like it's a great idea. Do you have like 3 applicable pieces where you just say, man, start here and kind of start taking those steps?
You know, yes. I think, first of all, I'd recommend a book by Herminia. She pronounces it Erminia, first name, Hermina, last name Ibarra, Ibarra. She's an academic like me. She teaches at a business school in England. She wrote a great book. You'll find it on Amazon once you search her name, in which she argues that the fundamental foundation for anybody's leadership is the simple act of deciding you're going to make a difference
Mm.
in the lives of others. It's not just about you, it's the purpose of the foundation or the community group
Yeah.
or the advocacy group or a company or even a country. So, the first step, I think, on the way to accepting some of the premises we've been talking about here is to decide, and Mini Ibarra will help you make that decision. You're going to make a difference. Then, step two, what exactly do I need to do to become better at leadership if I wasn't born with it?
Yeah.
It is sometimes said that Nelson Mandela was a natural born leader. But even Nelson Mandela, with 27 years in prison, uh, in my view, probably had a head start, maybe had a parents, teachers along the way that made a difference. But becoming a self-driven, self-instructed student of leadership over your lifetime. So what you're going to need 5 years from now is not what you have right now if you're in a leadership position or need right now.
Right.
It'll be different. So it's a lifelong process of learning what's vital for what's still ahead. These days, you got to know something about the cloud and artificial intelligence if you're going to lead anything. That wasn't true 5 years ago. So too long-winded on that one. Just to make the second point, basically a sentence. You need, number one, to decide that you're going to become more effective as a leader, or you're going to take on a role in leading others, again, to a more promised land. Number two, you then need to become self-conscious about learning what you still don't know. A lot of ways to do that: reading books, attending seminars, making your life a classroom. Just
Yeah.
look around, talking with people. And then two more quick points to add on. We have found it's really helpful to have a couple of people who are your sounding boards,
Yeah.
coaches, mentors, sounding boards, somebody you can trust to hear you out, give you some sound advice on where you're succeeding, where you're not doing so well. But I think I'm up to number 4 here. Number 4, unequivocally the most important, is to get out and try what you think you should be doing. Even if you're a little bit fearful, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You need you need a cushion in case you get pushed back or in case you get tripped up. So be careful. But what academic research has recurrently found is the best way to strengthen your leadership, making a difference, is to repeatedly try things out, put your hand up, volunteer, understand you're going to blow it on some occasions. When you do it,
Yeah.
then what's often called the after action review, the AAR. What did I do right? Where did I fall short? And what am I going to do better next time? Does that work? Yes.
Yeah. I love that. Well, kind of our favorite way to end the podcast is asking this question, which is, if you could go back to the very beginning of your career, so early in your 20s, what is the piece of advice that you would go back and give yourself?
Okay, Sarah. I love the question because I've had a rather peculiar career. I began as a physics major at the University of Michigan, go
Wow.
blue on that, and I intended to become a professional physicist.
Okay.
Later on, I moved ultimately into a business school where I studied leadership and governance. Now, it's just a completely different career.
Yeah.
However, I've had no regrets about having studied physics and applied math for 4 years at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in that it provided a kind of a discipline and a way of thinking about the world, which I have found useful, even if I
Yeah.
wasn't learning a thing about corporate governance, one of the topics I cover now at that point. With all that said, I think I would offer two final thoughts here as we close off. Whatever you do, and my guess is many of the people that we're communicating with right now are going to make a career shift or a couple shifts or move from one employer to another.
Yeah.
And I think my recommendation is to look at those opportunities in the affirmative as a time for yourself to become better at making a difference in the lives of others.
Yeah.
So being open to new opportunities, putting your hand up when somebody's looking for a volunteer, from my own experience, is a good idea. I think the second thing I would tell myself, I really like the question, is to have been less introvertish. It
Hmm.
took me a long time to become more effective. I'm still struggling with that in settings where I have to speak and think out loud. And I think I would give myself the advice back at University of Michigan in high school to join Toastmasters, where you learn how to give speeches by hearing other people give speeches.
Hmm.
I would have put my hand up more to volunteer for things that involved oral communication. So,
Yeah.
Sarah, there it is.
Yeah. I love
True confessions.
it.
I love it. I love it. Mike, this has been a real treat. Thank you so much for joining us. And man, I loved how we kept coming back to like leave the what ifs out,
Yeah.
you know, and talk about leading up. And so thank you again for joining us, and look forward to maybe having you on down the line. You know, who knows?
All right. Thank you.
That's good
Well,
stuff.
so Sarah and Brett, I really enjoyed the conversation. Great questions. And I think we're on the same page. Let's all lead up.
I love
Thank you
it.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to A Higher Purpose, a Vanderwoman podcast. We really loved this conversation today. So fascinating to hear about all the different things that were written in this book. And then since this book's been released, the conversation that we got to have with Mike about the things he's been learning. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please find us on social media, leave a comment to let us know that you enjoyed the episode. You can find us anywhere at A Higher Purpose Podcast. And if you want to listen to our other episodes, you can go to ahigherpurposepodcast.com. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Hey listeners, we're wrapping up the end of season 1 for A Higher Purpose. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've gained some great insights along the way, because I know I have. We're going to be taking a short break before kicking off season 2, but be sure to follow us on social media at A Higher Purpose Podcast, so you'll be the first to know when we're back. We'll see you soon.